Marilyn Torkelson is a master naturalist, a master water steward, and current president of the Wild Ones Prairie Edge chapter. Wild Ones is a national not-for-profit organization which promotes environmentally friendly landscaping to preserve biodiversity through the preservation, restoration, and establishment of native plant communities. And in this email that Jan Neville gave to me to introduce, she said that she has the most beautiful garden that she's ever seen with all natural plants. And the picture brings that to life. Marilyn will talk more about this. Marilyn, it is a gift that you are here. Thank you for your generosity of knowledge and time and spirit. And I leave it to you.
All right. I will just share my screen. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Seth and Jan. Thank you for getting up early on this Sunday morning and listening. Just a few items of clarification. The Master Water Steward Program is now called the Minnesota Water Steward Program. It's a great way to learn more about some of the principles I'll be discussing, and as well as the Minnesota Master Naturalist Programs. Great way to continue for continuing education. So I hope that after this presentation, you'll be interested in helping spread the word about the hidden benefits of landscaping with native plants. This is just a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. Probably you have fairly small yards, or maybe you have I have 1/3 acre, maybe you have 1/3 acre or more, or maybe you have a cabin with acreage. But I'm here to tell you that every bit of land counts for the survival of birds and the other creatures that we share this planet with. So first of all, we're talking about the hidden benefits of native plants. What is a native plant? It's a species. Native plant species is one which has evolved and survived within a biome without human assistance. So basically before European settlement. That means Minnesota native plants can survive our temperature extremes, which as we know is quite a challenge. They're also resilient in the face of drought or heavy rain events. Heavier rain events and longer periods between rainfalls are both likely outcomes for Minnesota as climate changes. Besides having built-in resistance to Minnesota's climate, they have more resistance to pests and plant diseases found in Minnesota. You might find these native plants in prairies, woodlands, or wetlands. You may hear me refer to non-native plants as exotic, alien, or some of them are even invasive. Daylilies, hostas, amber maples, Japanese barberries, Norway maple trees. These evolved on a continent far, far away from here. Unfortunately, many urban and suburban landscapes are filled with these exotics. They may be short-lived because they're not perfectly adapted. They might not have the right plant community around it, or the right growing conditions, or the soil microbes to survive. They may hang on and survive because you give them extra TLC in the form of supplemental watering and chemical fertilizers. The other extreme is that they become invasive. Invasive is reserved for the most aggressive non-native plant species that grow and reproduce rapidly, causing major changes to the areas where they become established. A couple well-known examples of non-native invasive plants are creeping bellflower, which is a problem in the cities, buckthorn, and garlic mustard, which are problems throughout our woodlands. Amber maples and Japanese barberry are examples of plants that are invasive on the East Coast and starting to become more aggressive here. They're the up and coming thug in our woodlands. You might even find some of these plants, unfortunately, still sold in traditional nurseries, landscape nurseries. So another thing I might talk about is a native plant cultivar, or shorthand nativar. These are the plants that are kind of in the gray area. They may provide some of the benefits of the unadulterated native plant species, or they may be devoid of pollen or nectar and resources. So on the left, you have purple coneflower. Everybody's familiar with this beloved flower in the native plant nurseries. They take it and they make it orange and they make it red, and then they become short-lived. They're cloned. They might not have the same attractiveness to insects. Take the plant on the right, the nativar or the cultivar Pink Double Delight. It's designed in a lab, it's sterile, it has no food for pollinators or birds. So we need to avoid cultivars or nativars that you might find in traditional native plant nurseries. So a non-native plant or even a native var does not have the same disease resistance and proven longevity as the original species that has survived for 10,000 years or more without human intervention. They are clone plants without much genetic diversity. And finally, traditional nursery suppliers may use herbicides or pesticides such as neonics that can harm bees. And I will have a list of native plant nurseries at the end, or tell you how to find that list. So we all depend on the natural world around us to provide the food, air, water, shelter we need to survive. These gifts of nature are known as ecosystem services. Notice the very people-centric definition of ecosystem services. We can't survive alone, though. We need to support the world's biodiversity to thrive on this planet. Ecosystem services are grouped into 4 broad categories: provisioning, such as the production of food and water; regulating, such as the control of climate and disease; supporting, such as the providing habitat and oxygen production; and cultural, such as spiritual and recreational benefits. When we damage our ecosystems, their ability to provide these services suffer as well. We need to protect our ecosystems, not just for humans, but for all the other creatures we share the planet with. When the pond in your neighborhood becomes too polluted to sustain its fish population, they can't just call in the movers and help them pack up and relocate to a cleaner pond. Only 14% of the land area in the United States is set aside for conservation. So that's what makes your yard very vital. One way we damage ecosystems is to replace the native plant communities with non-native plants. We do this with conventional agriculture, cityscapes covered in impermeable surfaces, and lawns. Lawns are so common, it's hard to visualize our yards any other way. Not only are lawns resource intensive, almost all turfgrass varieties used in the United States are not native to this continent. The sod grown in Minnesota is a mixture of Kentucky bluegrass with some perennial ryegrass or fine fescue. And Kentucky bluegrass, in spite its wonderful name, is not native to Kentucky, but the Middle East. These are just a few of the obvious costs to our environment of maintaining turfgrass. And we have 40 million acres of turfgrass in the United States, so there's room for improvement here. 800 million gallons of gas each year is used up on just your lawnmowers. As a result, 16 billion tons of carbon dioxide are emitted to the atmosphere, contributing to global warming. 2.4 metric tons of fertilizers are spread each year. Fertilizers break down into a nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas, which is 300 times more potent than CO2. And what I mean by more potent is it's more heat trapping. So it's even worse for the environment than simple carbon dioxide. And 3 times more water is consumed in the summer than in the winter, according to the University of Minnesota. And that's basically because people are putting so much water on their lawn. And this is potable water, drinkable water that's in such short supplies in so many areas of the world. And we're wasting it on an ornamental plant like turf grass. So shallow-rooted turf grass allows storm water to run unfiltered into storm drains that lead directly to the nearest ponds, lakes, and creeks, carrying with it excess chemicals, including fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and pet waste. This flooding off of hard surfaces leads to erosion, flooding, water pollution, harmful algae blooms, and loss of a water body, which is safe for drinking, swimming, fishing, and other activities. Also, the monoculture crop of turf utterly fails to support wildlife above ground or soil microbes below ground. Carbon in the atmosphere has to be removed, scientists say, if nations are to prevent the average global surface temperature from crossing a perilous threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. We have to not just reduce future emissions, we must also remove carbon from the atmosphere. The 2015 Paris Climate Accord, supported by every major economy except the United States under President Donald Trump, calls for severe cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the removal of between 2 billion and 10 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide each year. The most efficient and cost-effective methods for removing carbon from the atmosphere are woodlands, wetlands, prairies, etc. The good news is that when we restore these ecosystems, the benefits for the environment go far beyond just carbon sequestration. So this is kind of a complicated graph, but basically what I'm just trying to show you is that green is the amount, and those little carbon removal approaches, that's basically representing the kind of the green techniques that we can use to remove carbon from the atmosphere. But we also need all those conventional mitigation techniques such as solar panels and LED light bulbs and more efficient transportation methods. So this sketch depicts the root system of native prairie plants in comparison to turf grass, which is on the far left, and you see just a few inches of roots, whereas prairie grass is a vast network of roots up to 15 feet deep or more. We're not even sure. We haven't studied them all, but these root system, this vast root system, gives native plants their superpowers. 20 to 30% of prairie roots die off naturally each year, adding organic matter that soaks up runoff, preventing floods and erosion. The water soaks deep into the ground, replenishing aquifers rather than flooding into surface waters carrying pollutants after heavy rainfall. The roots exude excess carbon that they remove from the atmosphere, and this feeds soil microbes and sequesters carbon. It's pretty amazing the deep roots of native plants help the landscape weather droughts as well as severe weather events. This helps our landscape both adapt to climate change and mitigate the effects of climate change. The soil microbes provide defenses against plant diseases and provide 85% of a plant's nutritional needs. No supplemental watering or chemical fertilizers are required. For these reasons and more, native plants are resilient and able to heal the earth, especially in comparison to that turf grass with those tiny little roots.
Marilyn, there's a
Yes.
question that comes in. It looks like a clarification question.
Okay.
So Tim says, great presentation. A question on one of the slides. It states that 2.4 metric tons of fertilizers are spread each year. Did you mean 2.4 million metric tons?
I meant to say what it said. There we go. Nope. Is it 2.4 million? Did I miswrite that?
Well, that's his question.
He will have to, I don't have I would have to go back to the source article and look that up, but you bring up a good point. If I'm wrong, by a factor of a million, I would certainly like to know that and check it up. I will revise my presentation as needed when I get a chance to go back and look that up. But it's way too much because the chemical fertilizers are so polluting to the environment to produce. And when they get spread, it's such a small percentage that actually does any good. Most of it does get washed off in the first rain. I'm sure we've all gone for walks around our neighborhoods and the sidewalk, it's crunch, crunch, crunch. And it's like, they put fertilizer on, and where does that fertilizer that winds up on a hard surface go? Even the stuff on the turf grass, most of it gets washed out. So it's a problem, and this is what this green pea soup that we expect our fish and our frogs and everything to live in is what we give them because of this fertilizer, and it's just bad situation.
Thank you, Marilyn.
So I've talked a lot about soil microbiology. Healthy soil is a diverse ecosystem that is one of the most complex on the planet. Billions of soil microorganisms provide a host of essential ecosystem services. And I think you'll be hearing more about microbiomes, especially the mycorrhizal fungi in the future. We're just now learning just so much amazing information about how plants communicate with each other through the mycorrhizal fungi that can extend the length of a football field and bring plants. Plants can it's like a pharmacy to the plant. They can order up nutrients from these microbes, and in exchange they provide basically sugars that they pull from the sun when they produce that carbon. That's a form of sugar, and they exude it in the roots. So there are more microorganisms in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on the planet. Billions of microscopic creatures and miles of fungi in a teaspoon of soil. They're essential to clean water, clean air, carbon sequestration, and plant health. So basically vital for all life. Unfortunately, healthy soils can all too readily turn into lifeless dirt. According to the 2018 National Geographic article, more than 75% of Earth's land areas are substantially degraded. But we can reverse that trend. Until recently, we thought that soil organic carbon built up slowly, taking decades of decaying plant material. What we now know is that soil microorganisms can increase soil organic content in just a few years. So just a basic review of your biology from school. All plants use photosynthesis to remove carbon from the air. They use the carbon to form carbohydrates to grow, but they also put 40% of their excess carbohydrates into the soil. Why? To feed those soil microbes. In turn, the microbes make soil nutrients available to the plant. The microbes have the ability to break down minerals and decaying matter to supply 85% of the nutrients a plant needs. This isn't so surprising. You may have read that the microbes in our gut are what allow us to digest most of our food. So we're very similar to plants in that regard. These soil microbes are also the ones that are busy making carbon sequestration happen. That through their whole life cycle, they are creating all sorts of chemicals in the soil that cause it to aggregate. And so instead of turning to dust and powder, it becomes like humus, just very, so that it can hold water like a sponge. By a generous estimate, turfgrass can sequester 120 pounds of carbon. That doesn't account for the full carbon footprint of the manufacture of the fertilizer or our favorite power tools for maintaining turfgrass, including weed whackers, leaf blowers, edge trimmers, dethatchers, and aerators. Contrast this to the tons of carbons that can be stored by a prairie or a woodland. And don't forget to factor in the 16 billion tons of avoided CO2 emissions from not mowing 40 million acres of turf grass. So this rain garden is in my backyard. A rain garden is a shallow depression that collects water from an impermeable surface such as a roof or a driveway. It is one of 3 in my yard that provides water infiltration and purification, as well as food and habitat to support biodiversity. I just had to stick a few flower pictures in here, so don't get bored by the science. This rain garden is used to collect water off of a parking lot. It is in a church in Minneapolis. Could be your church for all I know. I lost track of which church it is from. Once your yard is established, you can find a way to replace turf grass throughout your community where you live, work, and recreate. So if all plants remove carbon from the air through photosynthesis, why am I focusing my talk on native plants? Native plants are the only source of food for 90% of our herbivore insects. I'd like to say that again because it's such a key piece of information. Native plants are the only source of food for 90% of our herbivore insects. We've talked about how important microbes are. Now let's turn to the macroscopic world of insects. As a well-known example is the monarch caterpillar that only eats milkweed. Without milkweed, we couldn't have the beautiful monarch butterfly. So why are insects important? They are an essential source of food for birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and some mammals, including even bears when they come out of hibernation. There's not a lot of berries to eat, so they're eating insect larvae. Insects are the little things that run the world, according to E.O. Wilson, a noted conservationist. You may have heard the term insect apocalypse. Think back a few decades ago when the gas station attendant put gas in your car. They would always wash your windshield at the same time, and it always needed it, especially if you've been driving at night. Scientists are learning how habitat destruction and light pollution is catching up to the insects. Even the ones that can theoretically fly away to a better habitat are not able to reproduce successfully, and the populations of insects, all insects, are declining drastically. This leaves our bird population declining as well, because 97% of terrestrial birds rely on insects to feed their chicks. 97% of terrestrial birds rely on insects to feed their chicks. Most chicks are not able to digest the seeds they need. They need soft caterpillars full of essential proteins and fats. If you enjoy watching and listening to birds, you need to feed the whole family, and that means growing the native plants that are food for insects, that are food for chicks. This is a great example of if you plant it, they will come. The rusty-patched bumblebee is a federally endangered bee. It has been appearing regularly in our yard since our restoration. The photo on the left was taken in the Boulevard garden on the right. And that's it. That's how you identify the rusty-patched bumblebee. Sometimes that little orange patch is covered by its wings. But this picture was taken by Heather Holm, and she got a great picture. Heather Holm is the author of a couple of award-winning books on bees and other pollinators. She often comes to our yard to photograph the visitors to all the flowers. So pollination is a vital service provided by insects. More than 75% of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on insects for pollination. So 75% of the world's plants and 35% of the world's food crops. That's pretty huge if you take away a third of there are already countries, China is already having to hand pollinate some plants because of the loss of the native pollinators. So Minnesota has over 450 species of native bees. Some of these bees are specialists that need the plants they evolved with to survive. In other words, they're just like monarchs and milkweed. There are bees that specialize, for instance, on boneset, a plant you may never have heard of and you might not have in your yard, so you'll never see that specialist bee. So a lot of people ask about honeybees. Honeybees are not native to North America. They're native to Eurasia. They're actually a farm animal that was imported because they're kind of a generalist bee. They're fairly good at pollinating most of our crops, but for instance, you have crops like blueberries that can only be pollinated by bumblebees because they use a technique called buzz pollination. So insects also perform other important functions. Carnivorous insects provide integrated pest management, which protects our food crops. And detritivores, such as beetles, return nutrients to the soil. So native plants provide pollen, nectar, fruit, seeds, nuts, and shelter for indigenous wildlife. And these are the sorts of images you can capture in your own backyard if you return biodiversity to your yard and use native plants. So one of the other ecosystem functions I just want to mention was trees to provide wood used in house constructions for human, but birds and insects need wood for their homes too. This yard is located in Plymouth, Minnesota. This is an example of how we can all heal the earth one yard at a time by providing habitat, not just for humans, but for birds, bees, butterflies, and beetles. I've encountered, just on my way to the compost pile, had a fawn jump up out of the garden that I had no idea was there. That's how dense my plants are, and I'm sure this could happen in Bonnie's yard as well, that she could have be sharing her yard with creatures like deer or weasels or mink or raccoon and not even be aware of it. They're doing their thing, she's doing her thing. So this property is great at sequestering carbon, cleaning the air and water. Healthy soils and native plants together provide the ecosystem services we need to survive. So native plants also provide a lot of services directly for humans in the form of just beauty, meditation, reflection, opportunities to benefit from just stewardship and giving back to the land, provides educational opportunities for future generations. So here's a concrete example of the change you can make to be the best stewards of your yard and communities. You can see here, my husband and I were trying to be good stewards of the planet with 2 Priuses in the garage. We had no idea that lawnmowers are typically 11 times more polluting than the average car. We were mowing most of our 1/3 acre lot and it took over an hour. This is our yard today after 10 years. I took a rain garden class in 2010 and learned about the benefits of native plants. My husband didn't want a small rain garden that left the rest of the storm water to run off the turf grass, which is also known as green concrete. He decided we should just convert the whole front yard. So we dug out the boulevard so it would act as a shallow rain garden, collecting water from the sidewalk. We used the extra dirt to build a short berm around the front yard to give stormwater a chance to slow down and soak in. Every year we learned more about the benefits of native plants. At first we were amazed about how much they could do for water quality. Then we learned about the health benefits, not to mention the entertainment value of being immersed in nature just by stepping outside our house. Next, we realized that soil health was improving. Even our few leftover non-native plants were doing better as the soil organic content and microbial life increased. Now that I've learned about healthy soil's ability to sequester carbon, I'm letting people know that native plants are a beautiful and rewarding way to combat the 2 greatest environmental challenges we face today. And that's, of course, global climate change and the loss of biodiversity. So I hope now you're ready to just get rid of all that turf grass. You might be wondering where to begin. There are many government resources to get you started, whether you want information or even financial assistance. People wonder if their city will allow a yard that isn't mowed. Eden Prairie not only provided us with grants 3 years in a row to install our rain gardens, they honored our efforts with the Spirit of Eden Prairie Award in 2016. So right now we have the very popular Lawns to Legumes, so that's available throughout the state. Offers not just money, but a combination of workshops, coaching, planting guides, and cost share funding for installing pollinator-friendly native planting. So this is how important this is. You might remember under President Obama, he asked for a pollinator corridor from Mexico to Canada, 100 miles either side of Highway 35. So we're all familiar with Highway 35, and we probably all live within that 100 miles. And so even nationally, it's an important issue. Oh, and going back, I just want to mention some of the money that might be involved. For Eden Prairie, I think it's up to $3,000, but for watersheds, it's up to $5,000. So it just depends on which watershed you live in. So that's an important thing to find out, and find out what resources might be available.
Marilyn, I apologize for interrupting.
Okay.
We have about 12 minutes left.
Okay.
And there are a few questions coming in. I don't want to stop you, but I just want to let you know where we are in the...
Oh, okay. So just some inspiration then. This is a shade garden under a maple tree. A lot of people only think of hostas. There's a host of native plants that will do well under shade, even heavy shade. This is a little rain garden. It collects all the rain from my garage and provides privacy and beauty year-round, nectar and pollen in the spring and fruit in the fall and winter, because that's a cranberry bush that you're looking at. It's covered with berries now. Just wanted to include this picture of the Boulevard because, again, that's where that rusty patch was found. Doesn't matter if it's a big or a small space, they tend to find it, and you can just see how interesting I think our Boulevard looks compared to the sea of just grass. So this is the brochure I've been talking about, wildonesprairieedge.org. You can download a copy of this. It has all the native plant nurseries that will be growing local ecotype, grown without harmful chemicals. And we're really fortunate there's about 20 native plant nurseries. Their services may include design, invasive plant removal, installation, and even maintenance. We also have recently posted the benefits of native plants and how to install and maintain a native plant habitat. These PDFs are also available on our website, and they include a lot of information I have here. These are some other sources of great information. The National Wildlife Federation and the Audubon Society have a native plant lookup where you can look up by your zip code and see the most ecologically valuable plants by zip code to put in your yard. So in order to maximize ecosystem services, there are some things that you need to avoid. So I've talked about chemicals, synthetic fertilizers, avoid those, avoid herbicides. Basically, we all know that side means death, right? Or homicide, suicide, nothing, let's be gentle to the earth. Tilling and digging also release carbon. This is why conventional farming is so bad for the planet, because every time you till, you damage that vast root system and the mycorrhizal fungi, all those, you basically are killing them off every time, and that releases all that carbon. So large areas of bare soil are something to avoid because that starves the microbes, as in an overwintering vegetable garden. So cover that up with your leaves and compost. So light pollution. I know people, there are street lights. There's nothing we can do about that. That keeps us safe, but a lot of people are adding just ornamental lights. And please remove your invasives. So this is what you want to do to maximize your ecosystem services. This is Heather Holmes' yard. I mentioned her once before, the author of those books. She's done her best to layer her layer. So she's got the canopy trees, the understory trees, the shrubs, the perennials, and the ground covers that act as a living mulch. So this is some more. Sorry, I talked a bit long, but if you have any questions, now's the time.
All right. So Marilyn has agreed that this presentation that we are recording will be on our website as soon as that is able to happen. So check back, and if you don't get all of these resources now, you'll be able to access them on our website in the next week or so. And so we have a couple questions, Marilyn.
Okay.
Two of them are very similar, and they're actually similar to the question that I was going to ask. And Tom says, we have been slowly converting our yard to all natives. As we eliminate our last bit of grass, we would be interested in a short native ground cover that we can walk on. Any recommendations? And then this is similar to Jackie's question, I think, because it connects to what I was going to ask. How do we balance the need for native landscaping with the need for surfaces where children can run and play? And to add my piece to this, we have a small yard in the city, and we have done a lot of things around the edges, but the middle we've kept turf because we have a child, and she can't, it's harder to play in a sea of tall plants all the time. What thoughts do you have?
That is a quandary. They are trying to develop like that Lawns to Legume program. They do make some non-native plant recommendation, which is very controversial to wild ones, such as Dutch white clover, which first of all, it volunteers readily, at least in my yard, but it's not native, and we're afraid it will become invasive in woodland. So it is a quandary. There is nothing like turf grass for playing, which is why I do still use turf grass and go back to this picture because that's my backyard. And basically the turf grass, it takes about 20 minutes now to mow, and we just zip around basically paths. I don't know of any that will handle heavy traffic. Now there are some sedges and grasses and things that can be mowed, but you're talking pretty light traffic. And of course, the more you provide for native plants, the smaller your areas, all your traffic sort of gets concentrated in one area. So of course, the heavier the traffic is. But I gotta say that Laura Ingord, while I'm botching her name, but kids played in prairies, and people worry so much about kids getting stung, but Douglas telling me actually says that you can pat a bee as it's collecting pollen. I wouldn't try it, but he says you can pet a bee and is that busy just collecting pollen for its young and to store over winter. It's worrying about survival. As long as you're not harming it, it's not going to sting you. And it is just true. I move through my garden all the time, and I'm brushing past bees all the time. And the only time I got stung was when I reached down to pick something up and I didn't know there was a bee on. I think in this case it was a wasp. And yeah, wasps are more likely to sting, bees not so much.
Thank you, Marilyn. This other question is from Nora, and she asks if you recommend transplanting native plants to another area, and if so, when? Is it a springtime, a fall? Is there a better time to move?
Yeah, I think you can do it in the spring or the fall. We talked about the 15-foot deep roots, so don't be surprised if you give it away and you still have more. It's like the loaves and the fishes. You can't give it away. I've been trying to maintain a mulch path, just the width of my boulevard, and I had to give away the same plants several years in a row before they finally gave up the ghost. So yes, most of them will transplant readily. There are a few famous ones that have tap roots and they do not like to be moved. Butterfly weed, it's known as, but it's a milkweed, butterfly milkweed. It is a kind of a famous one. It's very ornamental, but it's famous for just having a tap root that if you break that, then it won't survive. So as long as it's not a tap root, as opposed to that vast network of roots, it will transplant just fine.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We probably have time for one more short one. Otherwise, Marilyn has said that if you email her through the Wild Ones webpage, she can be a resource for questions.
Yes, and my personal email is my name, Marilyn Torkelson, Marilyn with 2 N's @gmail.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. I'll give just a breath here to see if there are any other questions that pop up. Okay. Then I thank you all for attending, and I hope that you come back next week. We have a forum every Sunday morning at 9:30, and next week is Dr. Matthew Filner, and it's called The Historical and Political Context of the Second Amendment. And Dr. Filner is a professor of political science and chair of the social science department at Metropolitan State University. So please come back next week at 9:30. If you think these are good and you think other people would enjoy them, please let them know. We can accommodate lots of people. All right. Other than that, have a wonderful day. And if you are interested in watching the Confirmation World Communion Service live, it is at Facebook in 10 minutes. Otherwise, you can find the recording on our webpage, YouTube page, and Facebook. And again, one more time, thank you, Marilyn, for your energy, your wisdom, and all of your expertise in this. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.